Welcome to the program today, everyone. Mondo Gonzales here in studio. We have our good friend Graham Keelan all the way from England to discuss with us some important topics. We're going to be discussing really what's coming up. Israel, of course, is at the center of the news today. No surprise there. But there's also some prophetic implications that we know are coming up in September with the United Nations. And so we're going to discuss that. We're going to parse it. We're going to pick it apart, and we're going to really analyze what the Bible says. Before we do, I want to remind everybody about our upcoming conference in Norman, Oklahoma, October 9th through 12th. We are getting almost to a sellout already, which is great. So if you are considering joining us, do it quickly. If you want to come and hang out with us, it's a great time to be in Oklahoma in October. It's not as hot. You don't want to come right now, but it's going to be a great time. Also, if you can't join us in person, then join us through live stream. You can find all the information at prophecywatchers.com. It'll be a great time. We have 24 speakers. It's going to be, again, a lot of fellowship together as conferences are. And we love bringing 24 people out. I mean, it's 24 speakers out. All the topics, we were just finalizing the topic schedule, which should be made available very soon. And it's amazing. It's going to be fun. We're going to be talking about AI, no doubt. Israel's going to be central, all the different prophetic implications of other things that are happening, the beast system. So it's going to be a good time. You don't want to miss it. Graham, welcome.
Thank you, Mondo. Good to chat with you again on this very important topic.
Let's set the stage here. I'll set the stage and then get your thoughts, because what we've been hearing, of course, since October of 2023, Israel got attacked in a very awful, brutal way from the Hamas terrorists and others in the other Palestinians, even some that are not involved in Hamas participated, civilians, so to speak, participated in that, as we know, took hostages. Many of them are still there. And so, of course, what we've seen is Israel responded. Naturally, you responded to a terrorist attack, and they decided that Hamas is going to be no more. Well, in the midst of doing that, surprisingly, we've seen the worldwide anti-Semitism just come out of the woodworks there. Of course, Hamas is a master at propaganda as it relates to sharing the narrative. And sadly, most people are relatively gullible, and they just buy right in to the propaganda without the mainstream media as well. We're seeing that right now with the alleged famine in the Gaza Strip. Israel's being blamed, but yet we know it's been absolutely documented that Hamas is stealing the food and then and even killing their own people to take the food and then reselling it to make money. And so if there is a famine there, you can blame Hamas for stealing the food. So all this is setting the stage, but what it's doing is it's creating this, this propaganda machine worldwide. And so now we have this upcoming conference at the United Nations in September, where there has been discussions about declaring or recognizing a Palestinian state. We already know that 143 nations, privately or individually, have recognized a Palestinian state. But some of the bigger countries are coming out threatening that if Israel doesn't fix the problem of the famine in Gaza, that they're going to recognize a Palestinian state at this upcoming September thing. Let me just say this too, and I want to hand it to you, is what we know is that even if this happens, this is a United Nations General Assembly vote, which it's symbolic. It has no teeth. You need the UN Security Council to weigh in on this for them to actually become a member. But nevertheless, now we have some bigger countries. France, Canada, Malta is a little bit smaller. And then very disappointingly, Graham, the UK is now threatening to do this. So give us some background. What's happening over there in your land? Because you're there and you're very passionate about this, but give us some background.
Well, Mondo, I feel I'm living in 1947 all over again, So for the sake of people who don't know, that is when the Labour government, a British Labour government, effectively withdrew from Palestine at the time, and handed over the problem to the United Nations, and then really went systematically went to sort of side with the Arabs. So it was Churchill's famous sort of contention, because he was pro-Zionist, pro-Jewish, and so was the Labour Party during the war. It was in their manifesto that they were going to, allow the Jews to establish a state, etc. They were all for it, and then a certain foreign secretary got in, and Ernest Bevin, and suddenly overnight things changed. Well, we're back there again, because just a few days ago, the Prime Minister and his Foreign Secretary were saying, David Lammy was saying, well, now's not the time to recognize the state of Israel. Recognize Palestine. It has to be at the right time, maximum impact, and what have you. And then within a few days, they completely turned tail. And I know what it is. Effectively, it's the Labour Party itself. So they came under pressure. A lot of their MPs. So they had they said there were over 130, maybe 240 MPs pressured Keir Starmer to recognize the state of Palestine, and obviously, we had Monsieur Macron. He came over on a state visit a couple of weeks ago, dressed in his finery with all the passion, addressing the houses, the MPs, both houses, and saying that France was going to recognize Palestine, the state of Palestine, in September. Of course, this what's going on now, this UN conference, is sponsored by France and Saudi Arabia, right? But even then, the British Prime Minister certainly, and the Foreign Secretary were holding and said, no, now is not the time. So what's happened within a few days? Well, I tell you what's happened. Labour MPs are scared of losing their seats because of particularly Muslim vote. Jeremy Corbyn, who would have been the Prime Minister if Boris Johnson had not won the election a few years back, he started a new party, nicknamed the Jezbollah Party, because his nickname is Jez, and of course Hezbollah. So and his friends in Hezbollah, or his friends in Hamas. I think that was he used to say. So basically, they're all running a bit scared. It's a bit of a shower, I have to say. And so what they've gone and done is this ludicrous statement that they've made. It's not even okay. Let me paint this ludicrous picture, because basically what they have said is a negative affirmation of the Palestinian statehood. So Keir Starmer has said, no, fair enough. They've always said that, that the Palestinians have an inalienable right to statehood, right? Okay. So, well, if you have an inalienable right to statehood, why do you then present the state based upon Israel's actions? Because it's a negative statement. In other words, if you believe it, then state it and be done with it. Not, if Israel doesn't do this A, B, C, and D by, in a couple of months' time, then we're going to recognize a Palestinian state. So they're using it as a stick to beat Israel with, essentially. You could say, well, everybody's upset about the images coming out of, Gaza. And listen, I'm no warmonger. I don't believe in dropping bombs on children. Anybody dropping bombs on children. So I have my own view on that. Purely the logistics, purely how this has come about by putting the onus on Israel to do certain things. And of course, as your Secretary of State has pointed out, it's pretty obvious to anybody else, there had to be two parties to the ceasefire, right? Well, the Hamas had just refused to have another ceasefire, right? And Qatar and America are the ones who are sort of sponsoring these ceasefires, sponsoring the conversations and the ceasefires. So if you're Hamas, well, yeah, I'm not going to have a ceasefire with anyone, because now all these people are going to recognize the state of our state, the state of Palestine. If there's no ceasefire. And what's really interesting is that one of the journalists they're getting a lot of pushback here, by the way, in the right wing media, the right wing press, what have you, how ludicrous this is. They asked one of the ministers. Keir Starmer has not said anything about it, other than what he said. And they asked one of the ministers, a junior, I think it was a business minister or something, why were Hamas not given any ultimatums, And if Hamas don't agree with this, if they don't line up to, their end of the bargain, because Keir Starmer said something about, we'll see where both parties are in September. So this minister came back and said, he's in the cabinet. He came back and said, we don't negotiate with terrorists, right? I think but you're expecting the Israelis to negotiate with the terrorists, do a ceasefire with the terrorists, but you yourself won't. And so it's a complete fudge. It's a complete cat-handed sort of something that they've done to appease their MPs, I think. So when I say we're back in 1947, it really feels that way. It's like the betrayal of Clement Attlee at the time and his Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin. We now have Keir Starmer and David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary. But I have to say, I don't want to be unkind, but certainly not of the caliber of Attlee and Bevin, in terms of statesmanship, what have you. And then David Lammy comes out with this speech at the UN, and you can see he's relishing it. Now, David Lammy is a Christian. He's supposedly a Christian, right? So, and I'm not going to refute that. I doubt that. Let's just take him at face value. But of course, he doesn't know too much about biblical things. Then, if he's sort of like making these pronouncements, and he says, he's very Churchillian, that the hand of history is upon our shoulders. And I'm thinking, which hand, Mr. Lammy? Which hand is on you? Can you discern the hand on your shoulders? And even Keir Starmer said, no nation has a veto over our decision. Well, fair enough, but just be aware that there might be a divine veto on your decision. So again, it's really cack-handed. There has been some pushback from lawyers in the House of Lords. A letter signed by 40 peers sends warning to PM that his intention to recognize the state of Palestine could be breaking international law because of this Montevideo treaty, whatever it is. But apparently the British didn't sign up to that, so we're not breaking law. But we have a government who, listen, that's their raison d'etre, is international law. We gave away they gave away the Chagos Islands because of a very left-wing attorney general in cabinet now. Well, the international law, we have to stand right by international law and what have you. So it's all, like I say, it's all a bit of a mess, So the fact is, Mondo, they're going to recognize, maybe they'll see in September they recognize. I don't know how they're going to withdraw from this now because, well, the fact is there is no state to speak of. There's no government in this state. The government, the Palestinian government doesn't have any means to establish any diplomatic dialogues with any other countries. So it seems to be what they're doing. They're just doing this recognition, which of course you can only recognize the country once, right? I mean, but once that's out of your arsenal, once you've used that, then it's gone. So, my question is, so what if, to the British government, so what if the Israelis then don't do what you say, or a ceasefire is not in the offing, and Hamas are not going to have a ceasefire, is the offer of a Palestinian state then going to be withdrawn? Because it's all based on what Israel does, not what Hamas do, So that's very interesting. But then, what are they going to do then? Are they going to apply sanctions to the state of Israel then if they don't, if they don't do what the British government want them to do? Is that the next step forward? Because as soon as you recognize the state, if you're going to put weight behind your recognition, even though there are no borders, there's no land, there's no people, there's no government, but hey, we're going to recognize the state anyway because we're all so upset with what's going on. And a lot of it, I know, it comes down to the fact that because the Netanyahu government is moving away from a two-state solution, it doesn't want a two-state solution. And of course, the West has invested its entire credibility on this two-state solution, non-solution. Because we know there's no solution. The Palestinians, their offer to the state is 36. They turned it down. 37. They turned it down. 47. They turned it down. 67. They turned it down. 2000. They turned it down. 2008. They turned it down. But now suddenly we need the two-state solution. And what's interesting, and I'll throw it back to you a little bit, is that they, when you watch the videos. There's a guy who does a channel where he goes into, he asks the normal Palestinians, the normal nice Palestinians in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, should there be a two-state solution? If so, what should happen to the Jews or what have you? And almost without fail, the Jews can't live here. They have to go back to where they came from because they're an illegitimate state. And I will say this about the Labour Party. There are people, I think, all the way back from 47, who still do believe that the state of Israel is illegitimate. And they can't obviously get away. They can't now dismember the state of Israel, but we can certainly, limit what you could do. We are going to push through a Palestinian state. And of course, now with the massive Muslim immigration, there are, they did a poll here after the October massacres, how many of people here, the young Muslim people, thought that Hamas were in their right to do what they did. And we won't be surprised there was a vast majority who thought, yes, they were in their right to do it. So, they got their demographic to take care of. But where we go from here, I don't know. And how the British government, if they recognize a Palestinian state, how they then go ahead and enforce that recognition, I have no idea. I'm going to throw that back to you because there's another thing I want to say about that.
Yeah, that's kind of the question that I have is the practical ramifications of what you see here. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the UN vote symbolic. It doesn't do anything. Even though, again, the UK is part of the Security Council, the United States is very clear that they will veto, and there's already been motions in the past of trying to establish a Palestinian state, and the United States have vetoed. Again, even surprisingly under less than favorable administrations towards Israel, they still recognize that was untenable. And you brought up the idea is you have this recognition of the state with who? It's been quite clear that Israel has said there will be no Hamas at least in the Gaza Strip as a governing authority, and so that is a standard. That's not going to change. And then, but what I have seen is even some of the other requirements or expectations, we'll say, by some of the other countries is like with France, is that Hamas would not be involved. And that there was expectations that the Palestinian Authority, which, again, is not democratic. You think about just another dictatorship in the land of Israel or in the Middle East where Mohammed Abbas has been in there for 20 some years, and he was elected going way back. So he's very old now. He's in his 80s. And what's next? And so they recommended, or they said that one of the expectations that they would have would be that even the Palestinian Authority would have to hold elections. But who's going to hold this account? Again, what I see is that these countries, I mean, the players, again, all these politicians around the world they're so, I don't know if it's blindness. It's got to be just spiritual blindness, because it's not logical in the sense they have bought in to the propaganda of Hamas. Like you said, you mentioned, Hamas has now stepped back in the sense of the discussions and the negotiations, because they're like, well, wow, these idiots in Europe are believing us, and so why would we're doing more? We're gaining more politically, geopolitically, again, through the fools in Europe by not doing a ceasefire. So why would we do a ceasefire? I mean, that's now they know, again, that at the end of the day, Israel has said, every last one of them, either surrender or die. Those are your options, because, and again, what you said too is that there is no two-state solution for the Palestinians, again, in Judea and Samaria or in Gaza Strip. They've said quite clearly, if we end up agreeing to something, it's just a step to the next phase of our rearming in order to remove from the river to the sea. There is no Israel. So, and this is exactly what we see happening when the Gaza Strip itself was given over in 10, basically 2005, 20 years ago. And they spent the next 18, 19 years not living in their by establishing or rebuilding their infrastructure. They did it for war. There never was a goal. There never was a true agreement where they said, yeah, we agree. Israel has a right to exist. We're going to live here in peace. Thank you for giving us the land. That never was the case. So,
and I mean, I heard a counter argument to your argument that you just made, and I'll counter that argument, and then I've got a counter argument to the counter argument. But it's almost like, but I think you're right that the West is sold on this two-state solution because they think they're going to establish, a sort of a function democracy. Well, let's go back to the Strip when it was given over to the PA, right? And the democracy there, corrupt. And so the people of Gaza voted in Hamas. And then Hamas threw all the PA politicians off the roofs. I mean, that's your democracy for you, right? And tell me a functioning democracy in the Middle East. I mean, Jelani in Syria. I mean, everybody's falling for that, I mean, even like President Trump wants to give him money and the Europeans, and so we're going to rebuild Syria. Meanwhile, they're killing the Druze and Christians, and it's almost, there is a blindness. It's absolutely a blindness that somehow we can conform that part of the world to the way we think, and we have spent centuries getting to our mindset, the Western mindset. Oh, okay, this is the best way to organize the system. Syria or Iran or Iraq. I mean, look at the mess that we made when we went in there, and now what's happened there in Afghanistan. And so, tell me where there's a functioning democracy. That suddenly is now going to appear. They're in the West Bank and the state of Palestine. They're all going to get on with each other, and sort of like happy days to everyone. And it's like, no, that's not going to happen, because, the PAs still have their pay for slay reimbursement program, right? So even if they're a moderate, I've been listening to the moderate Palestinians. Yeah, we can do this, we can build this. Well, how long, Mr. Moderate Palestinian politician, is it before you are going to get thrown off the top of the building? So there's something about, yes, it's the ideology, but it's an ideology rooted in a religious fundamentalism. And you are not going to prize Islam away from the Quran and the Hadiths. You're just not. So one of the counter arguments I heard today, Mondo, was by a Tory MP who thinks it's right that the British government has done this. He used to be a defense minister and Middle East affairs. So I thought, okay, well, let's hear. He's not driven by left wing madness, that's going on at the minute with what's happening in the UK Parliament, but he was saying, well, so yeah, because what we can do is we can separate Hamas from the Gazans, give them another option of governance, So in spite of the fact they all cheered on the October 7th massacre, but let's give them another option. And Abbas is into his 20th year of his 4-year term. So that democracy, and he can't hold elections because he knows he'll be out. And who will be out? Well, probably more radicals who will get in. So he knows, democracy is not going to work for them. So apparently the plan is we can have a technocracy in there. We can get people like from the UAE and from Saudi Arabia, and they can rebuild it and they can govern the Palestinian people there in the West Bank or what have you. And thinking, yeah, and that's going to work. It's almost like the Israelis are going to go for that as well, right? So you now have Saudi Arabia and, representatives of all the Arab nations now literally on your doorstep. How long before that turns into we have a foothold now? Because there's something, Mondo, about this ideology. And it boils down to the fact that, Islam says that, that once a land has been conquered by Islam, it belongs to Islam. So regardless of all which is going on, and thank God for America and Donald Trump, but it's America which is holding the line. The Europeans are caving, and it's because, the fact that they need the Americans, they need the American economy, they need America. So, but how long would that hold up if the West goes into further decline, that suddenly they're not going then to move in on reclaiming that land? I mean, that is just the fact of the matter. But we've always said there is no two-state solution at all. Secretary of State Rubio has just said, I don't know if I said this, but he just said, he's had a go at the French, the British, and the Canadians, calling it clumsy. And I think, Mr. Rubio, it's more than clumsy; it's completely asinine, because there's just, they've already given up. They've given up their bargaining chip now. So where do you go from this? But of course, everybody's like, ecstatic in the Labour Party. This is, and unfortunately, the good people of Britain voted them in, Mondo. What can I do? I can't do anything. It's just like it's, they thought they were the answer to the completely incompetent Tories who had been in before. So so we have more incompetence. And I don't believe what your president says about the government. They're not doing a good job. They're trashing the economy. The migrant crisis is even worse. They can't stop the boats coming in, the illegals coming in across the channel. So he might have done a good deal with the trade deal with America. Maybe he did a good deal there, but everywhere else, we are in decline. We are in a spiral downwards. So I see only another 4 years for this government. But let's see what happens in the meantime. But yeah, so that's kind of what's sort of like going on here. And that was sort of like the counter argument. I thought, well, is that a reasonable argument? Again, it's not a reasonable argument. So what we have, Mondo, we have two groups of people who claim divine right to that same piece of land. It's as simple as that, which is why we discussed initially the Gazans on Trump's plan. No, they're not going anywhere because they believe it's their land, right? Rightfully or wrongfully. So That's what they believe. They believe the state of Israel is an imposter state. It's a colonial state. It needs ripping out of the Islamic world, which functions on a completely different form of governance. So never the twain are going to meet here.
Mm-hmm. No.
So that's the problem, isn't it?
100%. I mean, you look at this, and I encourage people to, I did this not too long ago, where if you simply go read the Hamas Charter, just go read it and see if there's any level of compromise there as it relates to living peaceably alongside. And again, at the end of the day, recognizing the right of Israel's existence at all in the land of Israel. But this is why, if you go back, it's so important that if you look at Egypt in 1979 or Jordan, I believe is in 1994, these countries recognize Israel's right to exist. And so that has always been, especially with the Abrahamic Accords, back in 2020, is the idea of normalization, where we're going to normalize, we're going to recognize Israel has a right to exist, and we're going to have, once we do that, then we're going to agree to have relationships with them, economic, obviously political, whatever that might look like. Jordan was very wise to do it because of water, as an example. They get a lot of their water from Israel. And again, let's just be honest. We recognize that Israel, modern Israel, from a spiritual Christian perspective, is not living correctly. They are in rebellion against the Lord Jesus, their Messiah, and they will never fully receive the fullest blessings of God on them until they do that. And that's the whole point of the future of God restoring himself, restoring national Israel to himself. We know they lost that in the first century as it relates to when they rejected Jesus. But that's the whole purpose of the tribulation period. God is going to once again he brought them back in the land in order to get them into a place where he's going to have a conversation with them in the time of Jacob's trouble, in order to restore them to himself in righteousness. Jeremiah 30 verse 7, that it's the time of Jacob's trouble. And then you look at Romans 11:26, that all Israel will be saved and God will remove ungodliness from Jacob. So right now, modern Israel is not living right. We know that. So we recognize that. But it doesn't take away from the fact that God has promised this real estate to these people. And God's going to take care of it. Now, if God wants to kick them out of the land through the Romans, that's God's business, as he did back in 70 AD and 135. But for other governments to come in and try to divide up the land and go against God's eternal promise and covenant for them that the land belongs, and they're going to come in and carve it up. Oh, that's dividing the land. That's, in fact, in Joel chapter 3, that's one of the things that God is going to enter into an accountable. He's going to make them accountable for how they divided up the land. So as we look at this, we recognize Israel has a long way to go spiritually. But in the meantime, what do you have? The two-state solution is dead in the water, because one side says, no, they're not even allowed to exist anywhere here at all. And of course, as we said, Israel has been put there by God himself in order to accomplish their spiritual salvation, which is coming in the future.
Yeah, well, it's the piece of land, the most destined piece of land on this planet, right? So you're right. I mean, okay, so let's just briefly, because I think there's a bigger picture here, is that, so they're not building Zion. We've discussed that before. Or their version of Zion is a Western liberal democracy, right? Which is, that's okay. And the galling thing, is for us, for me particularly, is it was Britain that actually, it was the ships of Tarshish that actually returned the Jews to the land. And then there was a great betrayal by the Labour Party and the Labour government in 47, where they wanted to give literally Jerusalem to the Arabs. Now this Labour government want to do the same. They want to give Jerusalem to the Arabs effectively for the Palestinian capital, or half of it, whatever it is, however that would work. But obviously you're right, because the state of Israel is, as it currently exists, it's based on the British parliamentary system. It's based on English common law. It's none of that is none of it is biblical, of course, because common law, it does have a biblical root in Moses, but it's not Zion, right? It's not Zion. So they kill their babies like we kill ours. Yeah. So again, it's just, I was looking at their abortion figures. Apparently, since 1948, 800,000 is probably the least, up to 2 million. And it's the Jewish women and the Christian women in Israel, but the main ones who go for abortion. Interestingly, the Muslim women and the Druze women don't. So again, because what do they want to do? They want everybody wants self-determination. It's like, sorry, your path has already been determined. Israel's path has already been determined. So you actually don't get self-determination. Like you were saying, Mondo, it's they are brought back for a reason. And and of course, it's going to be a catastrophic time for all the nations, for the nation of Israel, and for all the Gentile nations. A time not seen since the beginning of the world. And I think what is going on here? It's the idea that the Gentiles still think that they can divide the land. That the Gentiles still, they're not aware of the redemption, because let's face it, I mean, your nation is a lot more revived than mine, but Christianity has blown through these lands, Europe and the UK, and blown through America, and of course we now have nations which are rejecting that redemption. So God says this, or Jesus said this. He said it'll be trodden underfoot until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Uh-huh. So it's almost God said, right, I'm driving these people out. You can do with it whatever you want until the time that I decide it's time for me to revisit my land, bringing the people who I've covenanted to the land back to this land. And of course, whether you're an American Gentile, a British Gentile, a French Gentile, or a Palestinian Gentile, you are still a Gentile. And it's interesting when I hear, people in, the Palestinians, and even Christian, Palestinians say, well, it's my land, it's our land. So again, we have Christians not really understanding God's plan here, that no, the time of the division of the land is coming to an end. And so, which is why prophecy conferences like you do, it's important that this message goes out. Because from 1948 and the Jews beginning to return, it should have been a sign to the Gentiles, say, oh, our time is up. But the Gentiles think that they're gonna sort of run the show for the next 2,000 years, and they have a rude awakening coming, because ultimately it's Jesus, it's the King of Zion who will rebuild Zion. And as we know, Mondo, the Arabs don't just want Jerusalem, they want Tel Aviv as well, right? But again, we don't even know if Tel Aviv is going to survive the tribulation. That was just built for this. When Jesus comes and he rebuilds Zion, the foundation stone, and he puts it together, we're going to see a kingdom there which is going to rule the world and rule all the nations. And, until that time, the Gentiles are in disobedience, the Jews are in disobedience. So all of those who are in disobedience have to be brought to the obedience of Christ, the obedience of the Messiah, all the fighting, the killing. And have you ever wondered, I thought about this, Mondo, you ever wondered why after 1,000 years of peace, I mean, nobody's killing anyone. There's no military industrial complex. I mean, there are no droughts. The sunshine is perfect. Temperature's fine. Even the lions are not eating the antelope. I mean, everybody's happy. But after 1,000 years, a resentment will have built up where Satan is loosed, and he goes out. He says, "A great multitude march upon the city." I reckon it's this. I reckon it's still this issue. We will not have these Jews ruling. Israel will not be the first nation on earth. So we're on this path, and I think we just, we discussed this earlier on. I think we have to be careful as Christians, Mondo, not to make Israel an idol, the modern state of Israel an idol, because they're not the light to the nations. Paul is clear, the light to the nations is the gospel. Those who carry the gospels. Israel is meant to be, will come to be where they be the light to the nations, right? But they're in blindness. They're in darkness. You can't be, you're the blind leading the blind. And what's really interesting is when you look at this, is that when, the Jews were in the diaspora and they wanted to be part of the other nations, they were rejected. Now they have their own nation and they want to be like us, and they're still rejected because they have a destiny, they have a determination, divine determination, which God is in the process of bringing it about. And I think we just, if anybody should know that, we should know that, we should understand that. Sorry, I've gone on there for a bit, but I don't want to say anything to that.
No, I 100% agree. It's something that I've been, again, talking a lot about recently, is trying to help the church come to that balanced approach to obviously sticking to Scripture. Scripture is the final authority, but also to help people see, I think that phraseology that you used is not making an idol of Israel. Look, I love Israel, of course. I love the promises of God. Romans 9, I camp out Romans 9, 10, and 11. But also recognizing that the Israel that we see today, as a Christian who loves Israel, we have to be honest. And we have to recognize, as you mentioned, even the abortion rates, that's something that dishonors God. The LGBTQ movement that is very, very strong in the Middle East. I mean, Tel Aviv is the gay capital of the Middle East. Does that please God? Of course it doesn't. And so we need to recognize that what we look at today in the modern state of Israel, I appreciate its democratic light. It is the only democracy in the Middle East, of course. So from a secular perspective, I can appreciate, again, their wealth, their technology, all the things that they're doing, a very powerful country. And again, as a democratic ideal. But from a spiritual perspective, they're in the same category as America. I mean, America is or the West, America is one of the biggest promulgators of sin and unrighteousness, immorality and pornography and abortion. And so Israel and the United States are no different in that regard, spiritually speaking. So we recognize that, again, when we look at it, what is light? Is it simply liberal democracies? No, the light is the light of the gospel and of righteousness and of relationship with God. And neither one of our countries, and neither yours as well, promotes that.
Yeah, I mean, we could nuance that, I suppose, Mondo. Maybe that was a little bit harsh. We could nuance that to say, look, Israel, the state of Israel, is not. It's a Jewish state, but it's not a Jewish state. It's a Judeo-Christian country because its roots come out of the West. It's a reflection of the West, right? It's a modern Western democratic state. So they want to be like, the West. So of course the West is saying, well, if you want to be like us, you can't be doing this and you can't be doing that. But the fact of the matter is, Israel has a higher destiny than to be like the nations. So, in the way that the West, your nation, my nation, we have taken the gospel to the world. There has been some light, but the light is dimming and the light hasn't been pure. Let me kind of rephrase it like that, So there's still the blind leading the blind to a certain extent, which is why for us, surely the word has to bring light to our understanding what's going on here, because the whole world's going up in flames in not too short an order, right? So it's, but yes, I mean, when we look at the sin, we know that there hasn't truly been a Judeo-Christian civilization. That is yet to come, but there's been reflections of it. There have been we have taken the gospel. We have had the inventions. We have bettered humanities. That's what but in terms of where Paul says the light of the gospel is the light of the gospel. And if you're not in the light of the gospel, everybody else is, you're actually blind you're blind to eternity. You're blind to the plan of God, whether Jew or Gentile. And I think that's where Jesus says to the Pharisees, he said, you're the blind leaders of the blind. You think you have the light, but you're blind. So I suppose I've had my say there, Mondo. I hope that's been all right.
No. It's been this has been a very good conversation, and again, we see what's coming up here in September. We see stuff coming out of the UK as it relates to their position on Israel, France, Canada, as you mentioned, and even the little country of Malta. So will other countries jump on board? Again, many of them already have, but this is changing some of the nature of the conversation. Yeah, but I don't think anything's going to change over the next few months. This thing that happens in September is going to be symbolic at the most. There's no teeth to it, but as you mentioned, it'll be interesting to follow up and say, well, what are they going to do? Are they going to sanction Israel? Many of the countries have already said that they're going to break any sort of some of the financial or economic things they're going to do to Israel. They're not going to sell them, arms or other things. They're going to stop that. But at the end of the day, Israel is a very powerful country. God has made him that way. God has forced this little tiny country, his country, his land. It's his land, as we've discussed. It's not Israel's land. It's God's land, who he has deemed to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob for his own purposes. But that's not going to change. But God has brought them back. They are going to be a sore spot. Zechariah 12, a burdensome stone. Jerusalem is going to be a burdensome stone. Why? Because God has a desire to save them, but he also has a desire to poke the world again. And as we see, one of the grander purposes of the 70th week of Daniel, the tribulation period, is going to be God's judgment of the world, where the beast system will come. And so they're going to get their time. They're going to worship. They're going to have their guy, and they're going to worship the dragon.
And when you think of it, Mondo, all the nations are going to be put under the authority of the beast. So,
yes,
almost the very thing they wanted to do now in that small piece of land, all the nations are going to be put under the authority of the beast. And, well, then you'll see what that, they'll see what that's like. But, again, there's so many things going on. But again, from the British point of view, I don't know. MI6 and the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service are like this. I was listening to Richard Kemp. He said the military, the British military and the Israeli military are like that. So what are you going to do, Mr. Starmer? When Israel doesn't, that's a legitimate question, when Israel doesn't play the game. Listen, there are problems, right? Because there is a messianic movement in Israel, right, Mondo? What's called the settler movement, what have you, they're attacking Christian villages as well, so they think they're going to achieve it their way too. Everybody thinks they're going to achieve it their way, and God is saying, no, it's going to be achieved my way. So we wait, we pray, we wait. And I just think, Mondo, we just got to push this gospel more and more. We just got to concentrate on the gospel more than we have ever done. Not the geopolitics, not they should bomb them, they should do this. No, it's the fact that we have to promote, we have to say that it's the light of the gospel, because Jesus, the Jewish Messiah, actually did Moses told them how to treat strangers in the land, and so did the Jewish Messiah tell them how to live. My kingdom is, and I've said this before, it's not the kingdom of God, it's the kingdom of the house of David. It's his kingdom. And, it's not the kingdom of the house of Windsor. Thank goodness. It's the kingdom of the house of David. And that is what's destined to rule the nation. So if we want to be in on that kingdom, we have to listen to what the king says and do what the king says. We have to say, yes, Lord, I want to be part of your kingdom. Then, let's start with the Beatitudes. Let's be the peacemakers. Let's love our enemies. Let's do all of these things we're meant to do. A lot of times we get caught up in the vitriol of the nations And instead of saying we're a people set apart for that, I'm preaching that. But I'm finished.
Well, this has been a great conversation, and I appreciate you kind of giving us the insight from your part of the world, which I'm going to come see you here very soon.
Yeah.
We're going to do some conferences there, again, in England, also in Oslo, Norway, and in Germany. So anyways, Graham, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Mondo. I've enjoyed it.
Yes. And thank you everybody else for joining us. And Graham will certainly be back for sure in another episode of just, again, talking about all things biblical, theological. As you know, Graham has been on here many times, and we don't just talk about Israel and geopolitics. We talk about some deep stuff and theological stuff, which is fun. So thanks for listening today, and we will catch you next time. All right. There we go.